Hi, everyone. Welcome to our channel. Douglas Macgregor asserts that Ukraine has unequivocally lost the war, a view he contends has been evident for some time. He argues that even the staunchest supporters of Ukraine's conflict with Russia in major Western capitals can no longer deny the reality. Macgregor points to the daily losses suffered by Ukraine, estimating between 500 and 1,000 dead and wounded, and highlights the effective annihilation of their army. He observes the deployment of reservists, equivalent to National Guardsmen who face dire circumstances. Russians, according to Macgregor, methodically dismantle any Ukrainian forces they encounter. The military expert notes that the Russians have already consolidated control over a significant portion of Ukraine, comprising 25–30% of the territory responsible for about 80% of the country's gross national product. And Macgregor predicts that Russia will likely annex and incorporate this historically the Russian territory. Concerningly, he warns against the dangerous persistence of those determined to prolong the conflict, as it increases the risk of regional escalation and potentially draws other countries into the fray, suggesting that some see this as a strategic goal, albeit incomprehensible. Shifting to the economic aspect, Macgregor reveals that a substantial portion of the aid sent to Ukraine, including equipment support, supplies, and hard cash, is effectively gone. He emphasizes that Americans might not grasp the situation fully, asserting that the U.S. is essentially paying double the usual cost for equipment. This is due to the dual nature of support, not only in the form of equipment, but also direct funding to the Ukrainian government. Macgregor suggests that discontinuing this financial support would lead to a collapse, with President Zelensky potentially seeking refuge in his Miami mansion. Overall, he contends that the military equipment sent by the U.S. ends up costing twice the normal amount. First and foremost, he points out the challenge of immediate replacement for the existing system, emphasizing the necessity to pay more for the replacement process. This results in substantial amounts of money being sent directly to the Department of Defense, contributing to what can be considered a significant part of the American defense budget, approaching $1 trillion. He expresses concern about the reckless spending in this regard. The exact investment in not just the Department of Defense, but also in intelligence agencies is hard to pinpoint, according to him. Regarding individuals within the intelligence system who provide sound analysis but face challenges, he notes that their insights are often disregarded. He explains that political leaders and military generals tend to selectively choose from intelligence estimates, shaping decisions based on their preferences. He highlights the historical pattern where presidents ultimately get the generals they desire, cite examples such as Lincoln and US Grant and FDR's preference for the Air Force and Navy during World War II. He underscores the long-term nature of such decisions, mentioning JFK and the generals involved in the Vietnam War. Acknowledging the consistent process of general offers emerging over time, he agrees with the notion that leaders have a say in selecting them. He suspects that President Biden is being kept in the dark, likening him to a mushroom, suggesting that influential figures like Susan Rice, Jake Sullivan, and Lincoln oligarchs hold considerable sway over both the Democratic and significant portions of the Republican Party in Washington. According to him, their influence is greater than what the American public realizes, asserting that they are essentially running the show. He believes that they are selective in what information they share with Biden, only revealing what aligns with their own agendas. In his view, these influential figures are steering the country towards disaster and are unwilling to change course. He describes their actions as doubling down on failure, contributing to the destruction of NATO and the unraveling of Europe. He notes the awakening of Europeans to the unfolding disaster, citing instances such as Lithuania's desire to cut off Russia from East Russia and retired Russian officers, urging Putin to deploy nuclear weapons. The Poles, he says, continue to advocate for increased violence against Russia and greater support for Ukraine, which he characterizes as a failed state in collapse. He points out the reluctance to admit failure due to the fear of losing credibility, emphasizing the disastrous consequences of an admission. He acknowledges that in hindsight, it was possible to heed what Mr. Putin had been conveying for nearly a decade, dating back to 2008 in Budapest in the Munich Security Conference. During those events, Putin explicitly expressed discontent with NATO forces, especially U.S. forces on Russia's borders. There was an opportunity, according to him, to consider neutrality and avoid turning Ukraine into a platform for attacking Russia. Despite the chance to make strategic decisions, he notes a refusal to entertain such options and an insistence on intervention. He argues that the war's initiation was not solely on Putin, but also influenced by Western actions. He believes Putin acted out of perceived necessity to prevent a threat equivalent to Pershing missiles in eastern Ukraine. Even after the conflict began, he claims that Putin was open to negotiation. However, he criticizes ongoing Western intervention, advising Zelensky not to compromise. Drawing a historical parallel, he likens the situation to the promises made to Poland in 1939, asserting that such assurances did not benefit Poland in the end. He emphasizes the failure to consider sensible alternatives, pointing out the lack of a broader perspective on the region. He contends that the current situation in that part of the world is more perilous than anything faced in the past 75 years. Shifting to the British system, he highlights the differences from the American system, where one can attain high ranks in the British Army based on character, competence, and intelligence. He contrasts this with the highly politicized nature of the American system, stating that political acceptability is crucial for achieving top ranks. He interprets Sir Patrick Sanders's statements as likely being influenced by Boris Johnson, emphasizing the political dynamics at play. He expresses a critical view of Boris Johnson, describing him as a bloviating blowhard and a fool, characteristics that he believes Johnson has displayed for many decades. He sees Johnson as an opportunist, drawing parallels with Tony Blair's behavior during the Kosovo campaign in the Iraq War. According to him, Johnson has taken this opportunistic behavior to an extreme, using Churchillian posturing for political benefit. He predicts that Johnson's approach will lead to a vote of no confidence, resulting in his removal from office in the coming months. Regarding the discussion about high-end conventional warfare in Eastern Europe, he believes that once the prospect of such conflict becomes evident, European nations would be reluctant to engage. He dismisses Patrick Sanders's perspective on adequately funding the British Army, asserting that the British military's relevance on the continent is limited, comparing it to their status in 1880. He describes Johnson as full of hot air, lacking substance. He notes that Jake Sullivan might view the situation differently, considering it an opportunity to engage in the fight. However, he points out that General Milley understands the limitations of the current USA. He's asking, and it is not prepared for a significant conflict. He highlights logistical challenges in Central Europe and raises concerns about the nuclear dimension if forces move closer to the Russian border. He points to historical precedents, citing Judge Franklin Roosevelt's decision to impose an embargo on Japan despite strong warnings from naval leaders about the heightened probability of a Japanese attack. Drawing a parallel, he references Oliver Cromwell, expressing admiration for Cromwell's decisive stance in the British Parliament, urging the king to step down for the greater good. Applying this historical perspective to the current situation, he suggests that at some point, someone may need to assert that to save the United States, President Biden and those around him must resign as the only viable solution. In terms of the Russian perspective, he asserts that Russia has made genuine efforts to end the war through negotiations. But these attempts have been rebuffed by the United States. He criticizes the level of support the U.S. provides to its proxy in Ukraine, comparing it unfavorably to the support given to allies during World War II. He emphasizes that from the Russian standpoint, the U.S. is not only supporting their existential enemies, but also permitting former soldiers to join the Ukrainian forces. He anticipates that the Russians see this as a deliberate act by the Americans, making it challenging for the U.S. to approach Russia either privately or publicly to address the issue. In his view, the situation is very serious, and he fears that the worst could happen.